Welcome to the second screencast for the FOSS Air and Weather Unit of Study. In this screencast, we will dive into Investigation 1, Exploring Air. This investigation has 6 parts and is designed to be completed in 7 sessions over the course of 3 to 4 weeks. The student learning outcomes for this investigation can be found on the Student Learning Outcome document on the Boston Public Schools Science Department website. Check out the Air and Weather Overview screencast for more information about the BPS Science Weebly and resources available for teaching this unit of study. Since this is the first part of the first investigation for the Air and Weather Unit of Study, this screencast will focus on setting up the structures that will be used throughout this module. Let's hop over to FOSS Web to explore the supporting materials available on the website. Once we've logged into the website, we'll open the e-Teacher Guide. On the Air and Weather page, you can find all sorts of resources for teaching the module, including teacher preparation videos that I'll refer to throughout this screencast, the e-Teacher Guide, Investigation Masters in both English and Spanish, and the Taking FOSS Outdoors Guide. Finally, you'll also find student ebooks, which are projectable. We'll go to the e-Teacher Guide. We'll go to Investigation 1 and take a look at the at-a-glance matrix. Here we can find the inquiry questions for each part of the investigation. For Part 1, air is there. The inquiry question is, how does air interact with objects? FOSS investigations are guided by questions that encourage students to engage in discourse as they make meaning of their experiences with phenomena. In Part 1, students work with a set of objects to see how objects can be moved by and through the air. They'll learn the science content, that air is something real and is called matter, air takes up space, and air interacts with objects. The at-a-glance matrix also outlines assessment opportunities. In Part 1, students will complete a pre-assessment. Now that we have a general idea of the objectives for this investigation, let's see what's next in the teacher's guide. After the at-a-glance matrix, you'll find background for the teacher and teaching children about properties of air. These pages contain information for the teacher about the content covered in this specific investigation and students' emerging conceptions of air. Next are the lesson plans. Let's go to Part 1, Air is There. Each part of an investigation includes its own materials list. This list tells you the materials needed for each group of students and for the whole class. Materials with a star are not included in the kits and need to be provided by the teacher. The materials list also indicates materials needed for assessment. This part of the investigation has opportunities for anecdotal observation notes. The assessment sheet, as well as the letter for families, and the student journal for this part of the investigation are marked with a box. They can be found on FOSS Web under the tab Investigation Masters. Next, the teacher's guide explains steps the teacher needs to take to get ready to teach this part of the investigation. Since this is the first lesson in the unit, getting ready includes tips for everything from assessing progress through the unit to preparing materials. This section also describes how to set up a materials station for ease of management in the classroom. This part of the investigation can be completed in one session. After introducing the airbags and establishing safety rules, students explore how a set of objects can be moved through and by air. After students have had plenty of time to explore and describe their observations, pre-assess students' conceptions of air. Step 6 of the lesson has each student draw and write or dictate what they know about air on a piece of paper. Throughout this unit, students will be recording their observations in air and weather journals. I like to use the blank page on the back of the front cover of the Air and Weather Journal to capture this assessment. After completing the activity, wrap up part 1. You will be starting 2 anchor charts. The first one is a chart of a word bank. Key vocabulary words are added to this chart after students have conducted the investigation and discussed their observations. Some teachers like to use a pocket chart for this. The second anchor chart is a content inquiry chart that summarizes the knowledge acquired during the activities. This is a place to capture student learning and thinking, so use the student's own words as much as possible when recording. In part 2, Air Underwater, students will explore the idea that air takes up space. Before leading this activity with a group of students, take some time to practice some of the challenges that you will be giving your students. The teacher preparation video on FOSWeb is a great place to see the basin setup in action. Remember to have students complete their journal pages to assess progress. Part 3 of this investigation is scheduled for 1 class session. In parachutes, students follow directions to construct napkin and paperclip parachutes. Students observe and think about how air slows the descent of their parachutes. This activity requires quite a bit of materials preparation, so be sure to watch the teacher preparation video for tips on how to quickly prepare the materials for this lesson. If your schedule allows, this is a great activity to complete in the classroom during 1 session and then outdoors during a 2nd session. You can find tips and tricks for taking this activity outdoors in the Science in the Schoolyard guide for this unit on FOSWeb. If you are pressed for time, you can always save the parachutes and take them outdoors during Part 6, Balloon Rockets. In Part 4, Pushing on Air, students use syringes to investigate air pressure. They compress air and use air pressure to push objects. Be sure to take some time before this lesson to practice with 1 syringe, 2 syringes connected, and the pop-off trick. Attaching the tubing can be tricky, so have a fork handy to unstick sticky tubes. Students often discover the pop-off trick on their own, which is great. When this happens, bring the class together for a quick discussion of how to safely do this trick in a crowded classroom. In Part 5, Air and Water Fountain, students use their syringes to set up a closed system in which they use air pressure to push around water. Setting up the system can be a challenge, so be sure to watch the teacher preparation video on FOSWeb to see how to construct a system. Because the setup is so tricky, I recommend pre-assembling the bottles with pipes and stoppers for the students. This is a challenge for adult hands, so it is extra hard for smaller first grade hands. Before guiding your students in this investigation, be sure to practice pouring water into the system, drawing water out of the bottle, using the syringe to blow bubbles in the water, and opening the system to make a water fountain. In the final part of the investigation, students set up a balloon rocket system and investigate how air in a balloon propels a bag along a flight line. This activity works best in a large room like a cafeteria or a gymnasium, but can be done in smaller spaces with just 2 or 3 flight lines and students taking turns. After releasing the balloon rockets indoors and discussing the results, bring students outdoors to release their balloons without the zip bags and lines. For tips on how to guide the outdoor investigation, see the Science in the Schoolyard guide. If you did not have time during Part 3, your students could also bring their parachutes outdoors for testing now. Phew, you made it to the end of Investigation 1, Exploring Air. Your students have learned that air is matter, air takes up space, air interacts with objects, air is all around objects, air resistance affects how things move, air can be compressed, the pressure from compressed air can move things like water, and air is a gas. Happy teaching!